Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello again, this is Jay Shapiro. Thanks for listening. First of all, best wishes to my Jewish listeners for the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot, known in English as Tabernacles, is also called in Hebrew Zman Simchatenu, the time of our joy. It comes immediately after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the New Year and Day of Atonement, which are times of soul-searching and repentance. So Sukkot is a time to lighten up a bit, enjoy with family and friends. It is psychologically a well-timed holiday. One of the purposes of this program is to point out things that are under the headlines, and although there is not sufficient time to analyze the really serious things, I think it's important to mention the serious things, and I hope that it will give the listeners a feeling of the importance so they'll file up on their own. There are two items that come into the category this week. One is the manner in which the United States has abandoned its allies in Afghanistan. The United States and Israel are close allies who share information that's important to both countries, and Israel works to retain good relations with the administration and with Congress. The actions of the administration with regard to Afghanistan is worrying. In addition, there is a second item that has to be watched. There is a group among the Democrats in Congress whose attitude toward Israel is radically different than in the past. The so-called progressive Democrats block funding for the Iron Dome defensive missile, which is vital to Israel. This is a radical change from our past relations with the United States Congress. I can only hope the supporters of Israel will do what they can to slow down or stop this negative movement in our relations, particularly with the Congress. I discuss this, I touch upon this, as well as others that I hope are of interest to the listeners, and I hope that they'll follow up from other sources. Thanks again for listening. I shall be right back.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello again, this is Jay Shapiro. My best wishes for the holiday of Sukkot, Tabernacles. I came across something interesting which has both historical and actual information and application. It has to do with Judaic treasures that have been stolen by others. The Judaic treasures have been of interest to many conquerors for at least 2 millennia since the destruction of the temple. According to a historian by the name of Michael Calvo, these thefts of Jewish items include the temple candelabra that were given to Pope Innocent III by Baldwin I after the sacking of Constantinople and the massacre of the Christian Orthodox population. Utensils from the temple, garments of the high priest, and plaques with the words Kodesh Lashem, dedicated to the Lord, books of prayer, documents, writings, sacred objects, cultural objects, and many other items, books, and manuscripts that the Vatican and other churches have appropriated and placed in their own storerooms, libraries, and museums. The book was written in 2008, a very thick book, 775 pages, called The Hebrew Manuscripts in the Vatican Library. It's a catalog of documents with location information and item description of over 600 items. There are no high-resolution scans of the documents or even a snapshot. There is no provenance given to any acquisition. I knew a rabbi several years ago who used to go to the library on occasion to study some of these documents. Now, the truth of the matter is, these objects were stolen from the Jewish people, and it's important to return all these stolen objects, texts, and artifacts. From the Jewish perspective, these plundered items are part of Jewish identity, history, and religious practices. Many original Hebraic texts contain insights into Judaism as to how it's practiced today, while sacred religious artifacts depict Jewish communal life throughout the ages. Imagine the reception these returned items would receive in Israel and its scholarship implication. Israel is very experienced in collecting and preserving and displaying and sharing. All one has to do, for example, is to witness to Israel's museum's clear images of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are more than 2,000 years old and were found less than 75 years ago. They've been shared online, by the way, for scholars and for the public. You can find them online. However, the Vatican's archives do not display their Judaica collection at all, entirely no. In a speech given by Pope John Paul II at a Rome synagogue, the text, by the way, was published by the Vatican in the New York Times in 1986. The Pope, said, "The Jews are our dearly beloved brothers. In a certain way, it could be said that you, the Jews, are our elder brothers. Jews and Christians are the trustees and witnesses of an ethic marked by the Ten Commandments, in the observance of which man finds his truth and freedom." That was Pope John Paul II. Now, this is a very powerful sentiment, a very true sentiment. Incidentally, the current pandemic demonstrated how fragile we human beings are. The pandemic is still with us. It's killed tens of thousands of people. Now, this would be a good time, an ideal time, for the Vatican to put action behind the words of Pope John Paul II. One of the commandments in the Ten Commandments is the 8th commandment. The commandment is, do not steal. The 10 commandments are recognized by Jews and Christians. Not only is the 8th commandment of what Pope John Paul II says Jews and Christians are both the trustees and witnesses of, but also Jews are the dearly beloved elder brothers according to the Pope. Then why not return the stolen Jewish treasures that are locked away now in the Vatican? There is a precedence, by the way. Pope Paul VI initiated a process of returning relics to the Orthodox Church. In 1965, for example, relics of Saint Titus, which had been taken to Venice in 1669, were returned to Crete. In 2000, Pope John Paul II returned relics of Saint Gregory to the Armenian Orthodox Church. In 2004, relics of Saint Gregory and Saint John Chrysostom were returned to the Patriarch of Constantinople. In 2004, the same Pope returned to the Madonna of Kazan to the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow. So the question we have to ask ourselves, are the Jews less entitled to their heritage than are others? There are Jewish treasures in the Vatican that are locked away. At the moment, there is no apparent intention by the Vatican to return these people to the Jews, who are now represented by the Jewish state. This Michael Calvo, who I've been quoting, at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, has itemized what he knows of these documents. Surely the Vatican should do the proper thing and return what was unfortunately acquired through plunder, through stealing. The rightful owners, the heirs, are the Jewish state of Israel. The Jewish people did not have a lawful representative until 1948, when the state of Israel was established. And we are now the lawful representatives and the lawful heir of the Jewish people, its history, its heirlooms. This was showed, for example, in the trials of Nazis, when the Jewish state didn't exist, when the Nazis perpetrated their crimes, but they were brought to justice by the state of Israel. And by the way, there are still groups in Israel, people that I know I'm friendly with, who are still searching for Nazis. They cannot be, or they will not be brought to court in Israel, but they will be, when they're found, they're turned over to the states where they perform their crimes. A friend of mine is extremely active in that. So we are the legitimate heirs of the Jewish people. And while people have been collectors of all kinds of things, the collections are built slowly, generally by buying or trading. But every item of importance has a history, a chronology, a custody, location, and things of that. But when we have been able to establish the authority and authenticity of an object, sometimes they go to museums, sometimes they go to art trade, and sometimes there are items that have been looted. Napoleon, for example, was an infamous looter of treasures in Europe. Hitler and the Nazis collected things that really didn't belong to them, and they did so all the way up to 1945. As a matter of fact, there's a group called the Monuments Men. A movie was made about them. They were army people who worked to recover the art during the days of the Second World War. So there is art and all kind of heirlooms that have been stolen, and the authentic owners, the genuine owners, have a right to look for and have these items returned. And we know that there are all kinds of authentic Jewish heirlooms and articles going back to the period of the Second Temple that we know are in the Vatican. Time has come to return these items as they have done to others. It's an important thing. I think it's one of the ways of squaring our relationship with the Catholic Church. Having said all that, I'll be back after the break, but I think this is an item that I didn't know much about myself, but I think it's important and really something should be done about it. Someone in our government should do something about it. I'll be back after the break.
Hi, I'm Steve Miller.
And I'm Matt Zucker.
Join us for Lighten Up, where we take a look at the week's current events in Israel and from around the Jewish world through a humorous lens.
If you've been paying attention during these crazy times, you know that it's a challenge to parody life anymore. But join Steve and I as we give it the old college try. Not only is being happy an obligation, but life is just too short to take it all so seriously.
So join me, Steve Miller.
And me, Matt Zucker.
For Lighten Up every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Israel, only on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. I want to mention a couple of items that really deserve more time than I can afford, give to on this program, but I want to keep them in the eye of the listeners because they are important items. Keep in mind that there's something called the Iron Dome system, which defends Israel against incoming missiles. And it's a missile defense system that has stopped thousands of rockets launched by terror groups like Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And this defense system, which provided by the United States, keeps these things from striking the civilian centers at which they were aimed. So it's quite important, and it's part of our cooperation with the United States. Now, the reason I brought it up is because, according to the newspapers, the Democratic Party leadership in the United States House of Representatives removed about $1 billion of funding for Israel's Iron Dome defense system. That was earlier this week. The revision came after progressives in the party refused to vote for a broader bill in which the Iron Dome funding was included. The progressive Democrats blocking the Iron Dome funding are among those who pushed to block arms to Israel during Operation Guardian of the Walls back in May. The move was led by Representatives Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. The Democrats could not get the bill passed without the progressives, because Republicans would not vote for the bill, citing the debt ceiling for its reasons. Because if the bill was passed, the debt ceiling will be raised by the Democrats, so the Republicans didn't vote for it. The Republicans not voting for it had nothing to do with the fact that there was funding there for Israel's Iron Dome. So there is a group, so-called progressives. I'm not quite sure what the word progressives means, but there's a group of progressives in the Democratic Party who have changed the face of the Democratic Party vis-a-vis the state of Israel. When I was young, it was the Democratic Party that was really pro-Israel. The American President Truman, a Democrat, recognized the state of Israel a few moments after it came into existence, but times have changed. They've changed very radically over the last several years with the influence of the so-called progressives led by Representative Ocasio-Cortez of New York. So I wanted to bring that to the listeners' attention because we have to keep an eye on this. This represents, in my mind, a sea change in the relationship between the Democratic Party and the State of Israel. Israel's support in the United States has always been bipartisan, and our diplomats have worked to keep it that way. But now since this new group, the group called the Squad, is four or five members of the Democratic Party who are pretty much anti-Israel. So we have to keep an eye on it, and that's why I brought it up. The next item, which is really under the headlines, you don't see it, it appears way on the back pages even of the Israeli newspapers, but it's really important. I want to call attention to it to the listeners. The Nir Barkat is a member of the Knesset in the Likud party. He used to be the mayor of Jerusalem. Keep in mind that President Trump closed the Palestinian U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem, and he said that all dealing with the American government, whether it's Israelis or Palestinians, has to be done at the U.S. Embassy, which they moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is our capital city. Up to that time, the American embassy was in Tel Aviv, which is not the capital city. Jerusalem is. And in East Jerusalem, there was a special consulate for the deal with the Palestinians. I myself once had to go there. It had something to do with my passport. It was rather unpleasant. At any rate, Trump changed all this. He moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, our capital city, and he closed the Palestinian consulate in East Jerusalem. Now, there's a move on in Washington to reopen the consulate in Jerusalem that would exclusively serve the Palestinians. So Barkat, who was the mayor of Jerusalem and now a member of Knesset, is going to meet with more than 10 senators and congressmen from both the Democratic and Republican parties. He's going to meet with key journalists and influencers in an effort to persuade U.S. President Joe Biden's administration not move forward with the idea of having a consulate in Israel's capital that handles relations with the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians are served by the American embassy, which provides consular services. If the Americans want a diplomatic emissary to meet with the Palestinians, it cannot be in Jerusalem. This is our capital. There is no other capital in the world where America has a consulate and an embassy serving two nations. It would be tantamount to dividing Jerusalem, and opening a consulate requires Israel approval. So they're essentially asking Israel to approve dividing Jerusalem again. Reopening the consulate would be a strategic mistake of both Israel and the United States that could cost lives. And Barkat, who's going to speak with these American congressmen, said that to reopen the consulate for Palestinians in Jerusalem he compared such moves to the recent problems in Afghanistan. He said it will represent a great danger. The United States invested trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, and shortly after the Americans announced they were leaving, the Taliban took over. Israel cannot take the risk of having the Taliban take over here. Keep in mind that the Palestinian Authority is really protected by the Israeli army against the more vocal Arab terrorists who were trying to knock over and get rid of the Palestinian Authority. Now, it so happens, and this is also important, the American administration is also facing pressure from the opposite direction from a number of the members of Knesset from the Joint List, which is an Arab list. The chairman of the Joint List is Ahmed Tibi, who sits in our Knesset and was once an advisor to Yasser Arafat. He wrote to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urging the Americans to open the consulate in Jerusalem immediately. And he wrote, "It's important for you to understand the utter importance of taking this step in order to create the right conditions for a meaningful peace process in line with your stated position that Israelis and Palestinians should enjoy equal measures of freedom, security, dignity, and prosperity." Now keep in mind, and this letter, by the way, was signed by the 6 members of our Knesset in this Arab faction. TV warned Blinken not to play into the hands of those working to perpetuate an untenable system of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. In other words, you have members of the Knesset, Arab members of the Knesset, sending a letter to the American Secretary of State, which is completely in opposite to the position taken by the rest of Israel. So it's interesting, by the way, historically, the United States first opened a consulate in Jerusalem back in 1844. So afterwards it moved from inside the old walls of the old city to Agnon Street in 1912. I passed that place just about every day. According to the Oslo Accords in 1993, the consulate on Agnon Street in West Jerusalem acted as a de facto embassy to the United States. The United States President Donald Trump closed the Consulate General in 2019, folded its services into that of the U.S. Embassy, which the U.S. had relocated to Israel's capital, Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv back in 2018. Now, upon taking office in January, Biden pledged to reopen the consulate, but he hasn't yet set a date. Now, this is something not in Israel's interest at all. Jerusalem is the sovereign capital of Israel and Israel alone, and therefore it's not a good idea to have another consulate there. I'll be back after the break.
Are you tired of political correctness and the fear that you might offend someone?
I'm not afraid to offend you.
Wow, look who's talking tough.
One has to be tough to keep sane today.
Hi, I'm Alan Skorsky.
And I'm Berla Seabrow.
And join us every Wednesday for The Definitive Wrap as we interview the most sought-after guests and expose progressive trends that masquerade as enlightenment but actually destroy our freedoms.
We are the No Woke Zone, so buckle up to this exciting show.
Buckling up, but I'm driving.
Sure, you can drive, but I'm the navigator.
Tune in for The No Nonsense, The Definitive Wrap Show, every Wednesday on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. When the state of Israel was first founded, and the rabbinate was established, it was generally led by rabbis who were moderate in their attitude toward a lot of things. But over the last several years, the rabbinate the official rabbinate has been taken over by ultra-Orthodox who are trying to impose their rules upon the entire society, most of society, which are people who are certainly pro-religion but not actively practicing. If you know, for example, that the number of more than 90% of Israelis attend a Seder on the first night of Passover, and many attend synagogues on Yom Kippur, even though they are not practicing Jews the rest of the year, but they are very traditional. And the Orthodox rabbinate is trying to impose all kind of things on them. And a new group has arisen, made up also of Orthodox rabbis. The group is called Sohar, and they have taken positions hoping to make Judaism more palatable toward the entire population. Now, it is true that throughout Jewish history, the Jews have been divided. You go back to biblical times, you can see it in the Bible. We're classified by tribes that on occasion have caused tensions big enough to cost lives and have broken out into civil wars. That was when, before the destruction of the temple, back in Jewish history. So it's not new to have friction within Jewish society, and it's something that exists, has existed, and probably always will exist. We don't have a pope who tells us what to do and what to think. And I think that speaks well of us. Well, we also hope that the rebirth of the state of Israel, of a Jewish nation after almost 2,000 years in our own homeland, would serve as a remedy for some of that division. Now, the modern Jewish state, Israel, represents an ingathering of people from very diverse backgrounds and from more than 160 countries. The creation of the state was inspired by a vision united in the Zionist cause and the hope that this common vision would serve to limit internal strife. However, it didn't work out the way we would have liked. After nearly 75 years after our independence was declared, we're forced to admit that a united Jewish society remains something that is yet to be achieved. Now, a major factor, according to Rabbi David Stav, who is the chairman and founder of Tzohar, which is a more liberal Orthodox rabbinate. For example, one of the things they do is they send rabbis to communities that are not religious who want to have religious services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they provide rabbis just for those days because they know the people are seeking to relate to religion, and they're trying to accommodate this desire. So a major factor behind the divisions relates to how the different sections of Jewish society relate to Jewish tradition and practice. Now, Israelis have shown, as I said, like the number of people who come to a Pesach Seder, show that they do desire, have some kind of thirst for Judaism. But all too many Israelis, particularly those in the younger generation who lack education, have grown alienated from Jewish practice because of certain segments within the greater Jewish society relate to them, and also the fact that their Jewish education is really lacking. I've seen, I know among friends of mine who are not religious. And when I say not religious, I mean they're not practicing. Well, somebody could be religious by the fact he doesn't beat up on widows and orphans. That's also a form of being religious. What happens is there's a tremendous lack of education in the general school system about things relating to Jewish history and to Jewish practice. It's a very serious thing that kids simply go through an educational system which they really don't know much about our history and how our religion is practiced even today. So the Jews, we have to present Judaism as something that every Jew would want to embrace. Our commitment to practice has to be a reflection of the concept of free choice, that we have a right to choose our destiny as Jews, a central tenet of our belief. But it's absent in Jewish society today. When tradition and observance are forced upon people, the inevitable reaction is that people respond negatively. Particularly in the modern Jewish world, not only here in Israel, but even in the United States and Western Europe, the younger generation, there's a growing sense of coercion surrounding religion. There's a feeling that people cannot choose whether to embrace religion, and as a result, rather than finding the beauty in Jewish tradition and Jewish history, they find it much easier to disregard the whole thing and simply turn away. And that is very tragic. So what has to be done is remove coercion from religion. It's not a simple step, but on a basic level, it required those religious authorities, particularly here in Israel, to adopt a far more modest and compassionate approach, which is, by the way, what the Zohar organization rabbis do. Doesn't mean abandoning Jewish law. It does not mean abandoning halakha, because halakha must always be the standard bearer for how we act as Jews. But what it does mean is there's another very important condition, is that religion has to be provided in an accessible manner. We happen to live today in a consumer-oriented society where speed and modes of quick delivery are essential to customer satisfaction. While religion is not a product, a consumer product, it is a basic commodity. So religious leaders need to find a way to ensure it is being delivered in a more accessible way. This means embracing technological tools and social media to spread the message of the beauty of our religion. We have to do it in ways that the younger generation will understand and absorb. By the way, this is an understanding that dates back to the book of Mishlei. It was written Chanoch lena'ar al pi darko, which means we have to teach our youth based on his or her capabilities. Once again, this never means reducing the sanctity of the words we're learning, but it demands of us to find ways to teach so that it can be understood, embraced, and even loved by the students who receive it. And the most important condition is that we remind our students and our children is that Torah is not intended to be a constricting set of laws, but is at its very essence a code of morality that can bring happiness and meaning to every aspect of our lives. This is a reality largely absent in how young people relate to Judaism today. Young women and men are unable to find the beauty in this ancient faith and identities because they often only hear about the restrictions that come with Jewish practice. Jewish practice is much more than restrictions. There's no disputing that we have a tough job. Our modern world is filled with distractions, more distractions than ever before. You walk in the street, 3/4 of the people that you see are talking on their telephones. And these distractions distract our personal lives, and on a global level, They take our hearts and minds away from the deeper concepts of meaning, of morality, and history which make us unique and proud Jewish people. Now, this is a challenge. It's the challenge of this generation. But we have faced many challenges for more than 3,000 years. And if we are to succeed in overcoming these things, we have to make the decision to make what could possibly be critical changes, both in our outlook and in our practice. Every generation has new challenges. They face new concepts, they face new conditions, and we have to acclimate ourselves to these conditions. I bring this whole subject up. We're in the midst of the high holiday season. We have to take stock of who we are and where we are headed. All the best for the new year. Take care of yourself. Until next time, Jay Shapiro signing off.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.